Okay, so we are on in Talmud Rosh Hashanah on page 5a, which is amazing. We've made another page. That's awesome. It's not a race, but it's still an incredible accomplishment and something we should be proud of. So just want to take a moment. No siyum yet, right? No conclusion ceremony. We haven't concluded anything, but I think it's really important for us to recognize when we have succeeded in something, and a page is as good as a success as any, and I think it's worth noting. So, kol hakavod to all of us, really pretty amazing. So, just to kind of remind and review the conversation we were having this conversation about the use of the one of the verses and the mentioning of Sukkot. And then we went on this detour on page 262, basically asking the question, okay, we have this verse, it's used by someone else to talk about this idea of redress. Meaning to say, the question is asked, on Shavuot, how do we know that we get extra days, redress days, tashlumin, right, makeup days, to give the, to take the offering in? And we went into this detour to kind of ask why that is, and we said, well, maybe we compare Shavuot to Pesach, and Pesach has 7 days, and so therefore that's how we know we got 7 days. Then we said, well, we're going to compare it to Sukkot, and it's actually 8 days, but actually the 8th day is its own holiday, whatever. So we go through this whole thing, right? But the original question, the thing that we were kind of really exploring fundamentally was, we have this verse, who uses it, and how do they use it? Everybody with me so far? Everybody feel like they... Okay, great. So now, what I want us to do is I'm going to start actually on page 262, and we're going to just back up a little bit just so that we can get some momentum. And it says, the Gemara asks, and I'm going to read it just to get us to the right place. So we're at the bottom of 262. They're going to be on 263. It's the last sentence of page 4b, and now we're going to be on 5a. The Gemara asks, but if so, with regard to what halacha did the merciful one write the festival of Sukkot in this verse? Right. So we have this verse. What halacha did God mean when we mention this? The Gemara explains, it is to draw an analogy from Sukkot to the festival of Passover with regard to a different issue. So we originally equated this in terms of days of redress, days which we have time to make up the sacrifices. Here the Gemara is saying, actually, we're comparing it, we're going to compare it to Passover for a different reason. Now we're on 5a, turn the page. Just as the festival of Passover requires remaining overnight in Jerusalem, right, which is something we didn't necessarily know before, and only on the following day may one return home, so too the festival of Sukkot requires remaining overnight in Jerusalem before returning home. So we have that just as, so too construction. Just as the festival of Passover requires remaining overnight, then that's how we know that Sukkot requires the same thing. We compare one to the bay. Ma'af, exactly right.
The innovation here.
Right, which is not something we'd seen before.
Because Torah says, right, when you have the Pesach offering, you have to remain inside. You have to finish the meal. You can't go out during the night in the same way that our ancestors on the night before they left Egypt were instructed not to go out of the houses. So you obviously have to stay overnight because wherever you're having your meal is where you have to stay. Sukkot, however, it does not say that.
So not only did one have to bring one's lamb and oneself to the temple, you had to bring your entire mishpah.
And your bitter herbs, right? And your unleavened bread.
And it must have made it really tough to live outside of Jerusalem.
For sure.
And very crowded in Jerusalem when everybody's there and everybody's bringing a lamb.
This is one of the miracles.
You know,
so holiday apartments is true even throughout ancient history. So, hello. You can take this one. No, that's okay. Okay, so we have this whole thing. You have to stay overnight, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then the Gemara asks, with regard to Passover, right, this is kind of where we left off before. And there, regarding Passover, from where do we derive this halakha? The Gemara explains, as it is written about the Paschal offering, the offering we give on Pesach, the Pesach itself, and you shall roast and eat it in the place in which the Lord your God shall choose. And then here's the key point, and you shall turn in the morning and go to your tents. Okay.
Implying that you've been there overnight.
Correct. Right, you're going back, turning back in the morning. Right? This is where we left off last week, kind of half step into this section. So we're now going to kind of dig in a little deeper. I want to point out, as we do the kind of Aramaic words that are really important. So I want to highlight the first one, which is Vitana Kama. It's the first two words in this paragraph, and we've seen it before, but it is the first Tana. Tana is the quote from the Mishnah or the Braita. That's the type of rabbi. And so we're going to ask the question, and the Tana Kama, and then there's going to be a question at the end, right? We know that because there's got a question mark, right? There isn't necessarily another word that would help us there exactly. Well, it says Manalahu, which kind of invites a question. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah, the Gemara just has a desperate need to pin every opinion and have a rationalization for each one. So if Rabbi Shimon holds this way, this is why, and if Tanakama holds this way, then the question becomes why? What's the reasoning for that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah?
So why don't you read? You don't have English with you?
Well,
So
hand me the English if that's okay.
Yeah. So why don't you read in Aramaic first, and then you can read it in the English.
Awesome. Authenticity.
Yeah.
V'tanakama, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Tashlumim la'atzeret mana lahu.
Great.
So, can I freestyle?
If you'd like to freestyle, go for it.
And the first opinion, the Tanakama, or that's the Mishnah, right?
It's the Braita in this case.
The Braita, sorry.
Okay.
And to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the compensatory offering, what do they call it here?
They call it redress here,
redress
but the makeup, if you will.
For Shmini Atzeret, where do we derive it from?
Okay, so it says Atzeret, but the rabbis...
Atzeret is
Shavuot.
Shavuot.
That's okay. It was you had a 33% chance. It's okay.
And I blew it twice.
Right. So we might. So just as it's a good reminder, right, that we use different words that are similar that mean different things. So at Seret, right, we often go to Shmini first, which is very reasonable. But in the Gemara and the rabbis, for them that is Shavuot.
And in my defense, I've remembered that 3 weeks ago.
We'll give it to you. So I'm gonna. So nice. So nice translating, right? From where do they get this halacha of Shavuot from redress, right? And so let's just make sure we're clear, right? We're learning it from the verse that we had learned all of this from, where it says it says you go to Jerusalem 3 times a year, and then it says on the festival of Passover, on the festival of Shavuot, and on the festival of Sukkot. It repeats the holidays after naming that you're going to Jerusalem 3 times, and that seeming repetition is why we're having this whole conversation. It's why they said Sukkot, for some, the Sukkot was the last holiday you could, before you hit do not delay. Or we had this whole conversation, well, Shavuot has this redress period because Sukkot is last. And we had this whole conversation. Here, this law about remaining overnight, they're getting from the same verse, the Gemara is asking where the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon are getting this idea about redress, and it's from this verse, right? It's sort of a repetition. So this question is from where do they derive this? Can I get someone else to read?
For Gemara answers?
The Gemara answers, yeah. But before you do, I just want to point out in the third line, the last word, you see that important word, ma, and then on the next line, af. So if you're writing in your paper, I would square it, just so you can see that dichotomy, right? So we know already that there's going to be a just as so too in here. Great. Okay, we're now on 5a, fourth paragraph. The Gemara answers. Go for it.
The Gemara answers, they derive it from that which Rabbi Bar Shmuel taught, as Rabbi Bar Shmuel taught. The Torah states count the days, as it is stated, a month of days, numbers, and then sanctify a new month with offerings. And the Torah also said to count the days from Passover, as it is stated, you shall count 50 days, and then sanctify the festival of Shavuot with offerings. Just as the new month is sanctified for the unit of time by which it is counted, that is for 1 day, so too Shavuot is sanctified for the unit of time by which it is counted, that is for 1 week. 1 full week, as it is stated. 7 complete weeks shall there be.
Nice. Okay, so let me back up one more step. The Gemara asks the question, okay, the Tana Kama and Rabbi Shimon used that verse with the naming of the holidays, right, for the law of you shall not delay, right? That was, Sukkot is your last chance. That's how they used it before. And so the Gemara is asking, okay, so where did they get this idea that we have this makeup period, right? We have one rabbi, they're using one source one way, and now we need to find another source for them to, for this idea that we've picked up. Is everybody with me so far? We talked about that a bunch last week and the week before about, like, there are two sources that can mean two different things for two different people, or one source that means two things for one person, or it can't mean two things for one. Everybody remember that conversation? Okay. So now we have one of the answers. So where do we get this idea of redress? And as Rabbi Dayan said very clearly, the Torah states to count the days, right? A month of days, which it says in the book of Numbers. And then sanctify a new month with offerings, right? So that is, we're starting to get this thing that we're talking about days here. Days is going to be our measurement system. And the Torah also said to count the days from Passover, you shall count 50 days, and then sanctify the festival of Shavuot with offerings. Just as the new month is sanctified for that unit of time as just counted, so we're counting for days, and therefore we're using days. Is everybody with me so far? So we're saying, okay, what is the unit of measurement? Because the Torah is using the word days a lot, we're going to use days also. And because Shavuot, right, it says in Leviticus 7 complete weeks. They have this combination. Oh, we measure in days. We're talking about weeks, so it's 1 week.
Which is an aha moment for me.
Yeah.
Because last time we were wrestling, I was wrestling to understand why is it that we have the week for Shavuot, which is a 1-day festival. It makes more sense for Pesach and Sukkot, right? But now, because we're counting days and weeks, we have the week for Shavuot.
A week of days, if you will. Right. Is everybody with so far? All right. What's the challenge you're having?
I don't know. I just need someone to kind of say it again differently.
Okay. So.
Or similarly.
Yeah. So they derive it. So they're quoting Rabbi Bar Shmuel, who says the Torah states to count this period of the year in days. And they quote the book of Numbers, says a month of days. Right? So they know that days and sanctifying new months with offerings, they're bringing, kind of associating counting in days, right? And sanctification with offerings. It's a little light.
I'm not getting how that proves that this previous statement that Rabbi Shimon Tashlamim Latzeret Monolith, what makes that prove that Tashlamim is okay
right.
for Shavuot?
So
it's not is it okay, it's how long do you have?
I'm still not.
Okay, so yeah.
Let me correct my question. I'm not getting how that proves how long do you have.
Okay, so it's two parts, right? It's a just as and a so too. So the just as is when we're doing a new month with offerings, right. We count in days. So it's relative to the holiday is how we count.
So the part that you're saying is thin is the fact that the verse says that you have days. How he's saying, well, you have 7 days for Tashlomi, but it doesn't actually say you have 7 days.
It doesn't say.
It does, but according to this logic, because when we count the Omer, we count the days and we count the weeks. Therefore, the unit is, we have the week as a unit. Therefore, you have a week for Shavuot.
But I still see how he's saying
No,
thin,
so
because why not say, I mean, I'm going to be,
Yeah.
I'm clearly being broad here, but like, why not say, like, just as for the Omer, you have 49 days to count, so too you have 49 days for Tashlumin.
I think that
You could
would.
go there.
I think you could go there, and in fact, the Gemara does go there. So yes,
Field goal! I love it.
right, exactly. So
When your logic gets a little, I wouldn't say sloppy because it's insulting to the Gemara,
Right.
blessed be, right? But when your logic becomes kind of expansive and you're hooking it to like, well, we got this word days, we got this other word days, we're good to go, right? It's like, yo, there's days everywhere, people.
so wait, so
Put a
it's
day anywhere.
so this is important. So that's because I explained it weird the first time. So the just as is. We count a month of days, and therefore days is the appropriate thing for when we do new month offerings. So just as it's true in terms of using the unit relative to the day, to the holiday, so too is Shavuot, because Shavuot is measured in weeks. 7 complete weeks you shall count, right? There shall be, that's in Leviticus. Therefore, that unit is relevant to that holiday. It's that comparison. Yes. Days for this holiday, weeks for that holiday. Everybody with me? It's that's the just as so too. Right? It's not that, and I said this badly the first time, it's not that days are relevant to Shavuot. It's days for the month, just as days are for month, weeks are for Shavuot. That's the comparison.
Oh. Yeah?
I think if you go to
Yeah.
the next one, it explains it better.
Great. Why don't you read that
Okay,
then?
I'll read that. So,
Wait, before you do, I just want to point out if there's any more important words that we need. I think we're good for now. Keep going.
okay.
So where the Gemara asks, we're in the 5th paragraph on the page 263 on 5a. Go for it.
Okay, the Gemara asks, but if so, say that the Shavuot offering may be redressed for only one day. The Shavuot is determined by a count of 50 days from Pesach. How then is it known that Shavuot offering has 7 days for each?
Right, let's pause right there and really understand this question. Right? So we might say, right, that the unit for Shavuot isn't weeks, but it's actually days. Right? And we only have 1 day of redress. Right? That could be the argument. Keep going. That's the question it's asking. Keep going.
Rabbi says, is that to say that we count only days until Shavuot, but we do not also count weeks? But didn't the master say it is a mitzvah to count 50 days, and it is also a mitzvah to count 7 weeks, which teaches that the festival peace offering brought on Shavuot may be sacrificed for an entire week. Further, it is written in the verse, Festival of Weeks, Shavuot, which teaches that it is a festival that is established through a count of weeks.
Great. So that's, they basically...
So the
Please.
for me here is, since the name Shavuot means weeks, therefore you obviously the holiday should be, I mean that's another sort of reinforcing.
Right, so I think for them, right, the name is secondary, right? But the
holiday is not called days.
Right, it's defined in weeks, right? We're measuring it in weeks. Days is secondary almost, right? So here, right, the reasonable question is, if we know something about this holiday, we know that we count days and weeks, right? But we effectively say, this is a holiday that's primarily about weeks and not days, and so we're going to go with weeks. Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay.
So for my uninitiated question, but
He's wondering who Mar is.
Mark.
So I think, I don't think there's one Mar in the Gemara. I think it actually refers to more than one person. You might know this better than I do. Mar.
I'm trying to read back.
It's okay.
Well,
Mar.
If the text is saying Amar Mar, it's just referring to the previous. It's referring to the
Last named
person who
person.
said the person who said the text that you're talking about, which
It's
is
the guy who,
Shimon ben Elazar.
yeah, it's probably the guy before.
Rabbi Bar Shmuel is the last named person. So that would be the case, right? So it's not, it's the relevant named person. Does that make sense?
The last dude said.
Right.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Is that good?
Is there an implied also?
Because it's not relevant.
I'm sorry?
It's about
Is there an implied also?
It's not about this.
Not necessarily because here he's
Didn't the last
quoting
verse say this and this
last
is now
rabbi,
problem for that last number?
also
Didn't the last line say this
Right,
and
that's
this
what
is
I'm
now
saying.
problem for this?
So wait, I want us just to,
This is
I want to bring us to have one conversation. So I think the best way to understand that Mar is like saying rabbi, and so you could say if we were in a room, we have a room full of rabbis today? We could say like, didn't the rabbi say? It's the one who spoke last, right? That's it. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that at least the way this is written, Rabbi said, is that to say we count only days, but we do not count for the next? But then he said, okay, so it's Rabbi who's speaking,
Yes.
right? If it's Rabbi who's speaking, then the previously named person would be Rabbi Bar Shmuel.
Right. Right.
If Rabbi is not speaking, if Gemara is speaking, then the previously named person would be Rabbi.
Yes. I think that's yes.
I mean,
So I don't think it's particularly clear. Is it the Gemara that's analyzing this, or is it Rava who's doing this whole thing, who's asking a question he knows the answer to already? Right? It's unclear from the moment. We could spend time, if we were learning Gemara in an academic context, we might say, well, let's look at the word choice. Is the word choice matching what Rava says in other places? And we might say, oh, it's clearly Gemara. But at our kind of light glance, it's hard for us to tell.
So this was his way of referring to the guy he's disagreeing with. Is that true?
No, I actually think he's using... So I actually think it's Rava, because I think it makes more sense. I think Rava is asking a question, like a rhetorical question. Right, so he's saying, wait, you're talking about days, but we also count weeks. Didn't Rabbi so-and-so say, right, we're talking about weeks over here? I think that's the kind of argument that he's making. Right, so the Gemara is quoting, kind of imagining this is a real conversation. So they're saying this thing out loud. I think the important thing I also want to add, just in terms of our understanding of how Gemara works, if you look at the third line, the very beginning, it says V'ha. Hebrew grammar would tell us that when a word starts that way with V'ha, it's introducing a question. So not the in this case, but it's didn't this thing that's about to happen? Question mark. Right? And so I think just in terms of us learning Gemara skills, which is a part of this, that's a thing to keep an eye out. Soon enough, we're just going to have like all of the words. We'll know all of them already, little by little. All right, so the next page is actually going to start a new concept. Are there any thoughts on this kind of before we move on?
Wait, so where do we end? What's the before they move on, what's the kind of conclusion to this?
So there isn't an answer necessarily. The question that they're answering right now is, okay, Rabbi Shimon and the Tana Kama of the Braita, who use the verse in which it ends with the festival of Passover and the festival of Shavuot and the festival of Sukkot, which is Deuteronomy 16:16, they use this verse to talk about the mitzvah of you shall not delay.
Right.
Okay? And since we were just talking about this idea of redress, which unto itself was a detour, they want to know how do they get to that conclusion? Right? So we know the verse, right? So let's take one more step back.
You got to go back to the original.
Right.
The original machloket is about whether you got to go 3 holidays or whether it's just the...
Correct. So the original argument is about the mitzvah of you shall not delay, right? How many festivals do you have? And then the question is asked, right? Well, someone uses this verse for that, but someone else uses this verse for redress. Is everybody with me so far? Right? We say we have this verse that's used for makeup, and it's the same verse as someone else was using for these 3 holidays. And so we go through that kind of the whole discussion about Pesach and Sukkot, and then we come back to it and say, well, these original rabbis who used this verse for you shall not delay, how do they handle this detour? How do they get to that conclusion which someone else used that verse for? Right? It's that whole conversation of every rabbi has their verse that uses for one thing. So we know this. Their one thing is. Let's find out what the next thing is.
It's as if the set of halachot are agreed upon. The verse that you're using to justify that, though, can be unique to you.
Correct.
So you're basically, it's almost like the game where you're trying to move each piece around in order to move the next piece.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to cover, okay, so they derive this from here. How do they get it? All right, they get it from here. But then they can't use that for this. So where do they get that? And then it becomes this chain. And once you've covered all the bases, now you can loop back around, which is here. Now we can loop back around and say, okay, everyone's got verses to cover all the halachot. Now let's get back to the original halachot.
Right. So this is the last piece in that conversation, right? Which is, we know the halacha of redress, but we just don't know what piece they use. And that's what we just did. Is everybody with it? Yes. Mark's over here?
So I think it's interesting how the logic comes there, right? Because we have this machloket. We get to this question of, well, do we have make-up time for the festival offerings, right? In the context of do not delay. Now they bring in this chapter of the question of staying overnight, right? Mm-hmm. Which is explicit for Pesach, but now they're connecting that whole chapter, right? Chapter 16 Deuteronomy is the calendar. So it starts with Pesach, it gets to roast it, eat it, stay overnight. Continues, then count the days and weeks to Sukkot, to Shavuot, to Sukkot, and then it ends with that word we've been using, naming all three festivals. So they connect that to say, okay, we now have this obligation to stay overnight for all of the festivals. Mm-hmm. And now, how long do we have?
Well, at least Sukkot. Right. We don't know about Shavuot yet, but at least Sukkot. You're reading the note. The note might be more explicit.
Well, right. But and then they bring in this idea of, okay, well, if we're counting the days and weeks for Shavuot, that tells us we have the week, which they kind of stated earlier without support. Now, so they're kind of following through these steps that are pulling together several different issues.
Right. They showed us the ladder, but it was missing some rungs, and they plugged in the rest of the rungs along the way here, and now we can actually climb it. Okay, cool. So I think the last thing I want to say kind of on this before we move on, which is, one, this was a pretty solid detour, right? We were talking about you shall not delay, and we spent a bunch of time exploring verses from the Torah, which we didn't really look up the way we might have in a different context. But I think the important piece for us, and I think Rabbi Stein, you said it exactly right, which was, we're using these concepts to build on one another, right? We hadn't really spent any time with this idea about using units of time or units of measurement. We now have this whole idea of using units of measurement we didn't have before. We're 5 pages in, we've never seen it. And yet we kind of just accepted it. And so I want to just point, the power of that it makes sense. We may not agree with it, it may not make as much sense as we want, but it works, and we want it to work. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement. Okay, let's turn the page. We're now on the second half of 5a on page 264. This is probably the last printed page you have, so that means that I'm going to make us new packets next time. We've been on these packets for 2 months. It's awesome. And you can see, at least in our Gemaras, there's this little symbol that's going to tell us a new idea is sort of coming together. Okay, would someone like to read who hasn't read yet? Go for it.
It was taught in the Baraita that one becomes liable for transgressing the prohibition against delaying if he delays bringing the Paschal lamb.
That's our commentary, kind of giving us context. Keep going.
The Gemara expresses its astonishment about this
astonishment
about this rule. But is the Paschal lamb fit to be sacrificed on the other festivals? The Paschal lamb has a fixed time to be brought on the 14th of Nisan. If one sacrificed it then, he has sacrificed it. But if he did not sacrifice it then, it is excluded forever from any use.
Great. So we're making a pretty big distinction here, right, between the conversations we had before, where we're saying, look, this is something, it was a vow I made. It was voluntary. I have all of this time.
This isn't voluntary.
But this isn't right. This is really different.
Now we're talking about the thing itself that you were sacrificing.
Exactly. Right. So on Passover, there is the Paschal offering, right? Yeah.
The Torah is explicit that if you are able to, right? You're not in a state of impurity. You're not on a business trip to, Hong Kong, right? That you are obligated to bring the Passover offering on the 14th of Nisan.
Right.
And if you do not, you are cut off from the people.
Right.
Which is kind of the most severe penalty in the Torah.
Right, that's good. Right, then there's Pesach Sheni, but even still,
but
that's
covers
different.
the situation if you are ritually impure,
Right.
if you were
Some sort
in
of
a
other
foreign
reason.
land,
Exactly.
right? There was it's not simply that you were able to and didn't.
Right. So here we're also learning where the level of leniency can actually go. Right? Which is, we had all sorts of leniency about these other sacrifices, but here, this one's contextual. It is the offering we give on Passover, therefore it needs to be on Passover, and there's no leniency provided for you.
It's not on Passover, on the 14th.
Right?
You
Right.
can't even do it later in the week of
Right,
Passover.
that day.
So you're going to come the day before Pesach.
Right.
So you can be home for favors.
Well,
But you have to find lodging in Jerusalem for Seder.
I
So,
don't get that one.
don't get what?
No. I have no concept how this ever happened in real life.
Right. That's its own conversation, right? Okay. So now, yes.
Wait.
Yes.
Wait. So the issue, as I understand it, this section talks about when you can sacrifice that object, that specific, that you have designated a particular lamb for this sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about the person anymore. It's about the lamb.
Correct.
And that the lamb has to be sacrificed in the right way, on the right day, with no leniency at all. And if you don't do it, then you can't use that lamb. That's how I understand it. You can't use that lamb for a sacrifice at all.
Yes.
But it
You are
doesn't-
exactly right.
But it's not saying that you are not allowed to sacrifice something else at a different time. It doesn't say that.
Right, so no, you're making a really important distinction, right? It's not about the offering, it's about the physical object, which is the lamb itself.
That's right.
Which is, it can be only designated we designated it for this one use. And if I missed it, that lamb can't be used for any other thing.
That's right.
Exactly right.
And that to me ties into the whole concept of using one verse to mean one thing. The mindset that says if you use this for this, you can't use it for anything else.
Right.
You're supposed to use this lamb specifically for Pesach sacrifice. You blew it, you use it, you can't use it for anything else.
Right. That's really meta, right? Right? So that the whole idea that we only use one verse at a time, right, for one thing, matches this idea that I have designated this thing. It's hekdesh, right? I've designated it for the temple.
Specifically
For this specific thing. That's cool. Nice. Good catch. Good catch. Okay, let's read a little bit more.
It is excluded from any use.
Right. Exactly.
So what happens
the lamb gets saved.
You put it out to pasture.
lamb goes out to pasture
You can eat it.
and
No.
no, I
No.
don't think so.
I got the presidential pardon. If it says from any use, that's right.
Right. So it can't be used in any
Put it
way.
out to pasture.
You can't take the wool. You can't.
We're exactly right.
All right.
Okay. So let's read a little bit further. Who hasn't read yet? You're not reading today. All right. You were reading before. Why don't you read the one more line? Rav Chisda said.
Rav Chisda said, the Paschal lamb is cited here for no reason. That is to say, the prohibition against delaying is not relevant to the Paschal lamb, and the latter was mentioned in the Baraita only because firstborn offerings, animal tithes, and the Paschal lamb are often grouped together.
So, hold on, I think I remember here. So, does everyone have 260 in their packets, or is that before what you have? All right, look at page 260. And look at the very top of the page. This is at the end of 4a. It says, the sages taught in a Baraita, with regard to those who are liable for vows of monetary payment, or for vows of valuations, or for dedications, or for consecrations, sin offerings, guilt offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings, vows of charity, tithes, firstborn offerings, animal tithes, or the Paschal offering, or for gleanings, now we're at the second, right? Or forgotten sheaves, or for produce at the corner of the field. Once 3 festivals have passed, they transgress the prohibition, you shall not delay. This is the Braita that they're referring to. So all of these things, when we read it before, we said, oh, all of these things fit that category that I have whatever amount of time this rabbi said, one of the rabbis says, to fulfill my obligation before I cross shall not delay.
This is our most expansive reading.
Right, it's the list of all the things this applies to.
Right.
Except there's this one thing that fits weird, which is the Paschal offering, and that's what they're talking about here.
And that, well, and we haven't reached the end of this yet.
We haven't yet.
Right.
No spoilers. No,
Okay.
just kidding.
I was happy because I looked ahead and I was like, I feel like I know where this is going. and it went there because the only way to tie off a loose end, right? In other words, when you're stitching a garment or when you're knitting something, right? You're always weaving things together. And once you weave things and they overlap, they're strong. But you always have that one thread that is sticking out last that you then have to loop back around and tie it up to tie things off. So we're basically doing this kind of stitching and overlapping.
Right.
But we need to get to the point where that one spare thread now gets looped back around and tied
Right.
off.
And we're almost there.
We're almost there.
All right, so we have this outlier of the Paschal lamb, which none of us noticed before. Also, I'll speak for myself. I did not notice before, right? I won't speak for any of you. And so here they say, Rav Chisda is saying, this offering is cited for no reason. It's just that these other things are grouped together, and so this one got thrown in. I want to read the note on the side where it talks about this word kadi.
But can I ask a dumb question?
Sure.
Why does the Paschal lamb fit here?
So you answer the question. Why doesn't it fit here, based on the context?
I'm not so sure from the context because it's not a lot here, but based on from what I know is that it's typically, there's a bunch of verses in the Torah that say it's really important that you eat the Pesach before a certain number of days go out.
Right.
But if being stupid, I'm trying to be smart, which is, if it was included in this previous list that we talked about on 4a, then the implication is, theoretically, that if the baby was sick, whatever, and you roll into Jerusalem 6 months later, and you're like, yo, I never gave my Paschal lamb, I'm going to do it now, and you bring it, and you sacrifice it, and you eat it, according to that Baraita you just pulled on 4a, maybe you're okay.
Right.
Yes. But here it's saying that it's not okay.
Right, I get that.
Yeah.
I think I get that, but I'm still stuck on well...
Why is it in that list in the first place?
Or Rav Chisda's statement here is Pesach nicht halacha. It's like basically like, nah, this is just wrong. It just doesn't belong there.
Right.
That's pretty flimsy.
Well, but what I think he's saying is that these sacrifices, right, firstborn animal ties at Passover, they're often grouped together because in general, the rules are the same, right? Checking it for defects, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is that the only reason it was in the Baraita was not to suggest that you can delay, but because it's usually grouped with these other offerings. And the point that's being made here is that you cannot delay with the Paschal offering. But
It's an exception to the others.
Right,
But it's
and-
an exception that got dragged along.
Right.
Because it has a lot in common with the others. In other things.
Which doesn't
and
make
now
it.
somebody's going to look back and say, wait a minute, we included it in this Baraita and we said we could delay.
Yeah.
But here we're saying we can't.
Yeah.
And so Rav Chisda is saying that's because it shouldn't have been there except for the fact that
It really
For every other reason, it might be there.
There, I really wanted to talk about other aspects of those offerings that they do have things in common, but it was bad. Or that's not really
But
what
that's
they
weak.
meant.
But that's weak.
Right.
Gemara is not going to be happy
No, I know.
with drawing this conclusion. That's like that. You can't just dismiss something out of a list because
Right.
It doesn't work.
sorry, this doesn't apply to this
Right.
whole Braita just because it was put there accidentally. It was put there by association.
Right. We know somebody's got to
That's-
come harder than Rav
Right.
because where Rav
That doesn't
is
tie
standing
things
right
up.
now isn't super strong.
That would still be a little thread that if you pulled on it, the garment would come undone.
Great. So that's what we're going to do right now because I don't think it's particularly satisfying either as a reason. Who hasn't read? Who's going to read today? Has everybody read? Who's going to read? I don't think you've read. So why don't you read with Rav Sheshet?
Okay, so Rav Sheshet Amar Mai Pesach, Shalmei Pesach. Okay, we're all supposed to go, ooh.
Ooh.
Okay. In other words, All right. You think that the Breita is talking about the Paschal Lamb itself, but no, it's calling it the Paschal Lamb for a reason that is not. It isn't the Paschal Lamb. What's meant here when the Breita says Paschal Lamb is it's the peace offering, right? It's the Shalom Pesach. It's the peace offering that's brought in place of a Paschal Lamb. And then the explanation here: if a lamb had been set aside to be sacrificed as a Paschal offering was lost. Okay? Right? It's not just that like you set it aside and now the time has passed and now you just have to set it out to pasture. You set it aside to be the Paschal offering and now you lost it.
It's with your keys.
Uh-oh. Okay. And so you go, but I still need to sacrifice a Paschal lamb. So I designate a different lamb as the Paschal offering, and I sacrifice that. But then I find the one that I had initially set aside. So I've satisfied the mitzvah of the Paschal sacrifice with a new lamb, but I have a lost and found lamb that I had designated, and now what do I do with it?
Right, it fits in that category that you named before, which is it can't be used for other things.
Right, except we actually are told we can do something with it, and what we're allowed to do with it is the peace offering. In other words, you're actually able to bring a lamb that was designated for a Paschal sacrifice to be the shlamim sacrifice of Pesach if you had lost it, sacrificed another lamb in its place, and then found it later. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay?
Good?
Korban Pesach is, if I'm remembering it is a type of Shalom. No?
It's a type, but it's a special kind, and I think that's probably why they conclude that that's permissible. In other words, because the Korban Pesach is basically a specialized form of shlamim, making it hekdesh to be the Paschal sacrifice makes it still usable for a shlamim. In other words, it's not that you can't use it until the next Pesach rolls around, and even then, I think you probably have an issue with age. So like now you just like set it out to pasture and it lives the rest of its life out wherever. So like if you designated something to be a Paschal sacrifice, you can still use it for a shlamim if it got lost and was found again, etc. Right? But then the Gemara has a kushya on that.
Wait, so before we get there, no, it's okay. I know you're very excited. It's good. It's good.
It's beautiful.
But I think the important piece is this: we lost the lamb, we found it, and it's that offering that is meant in this list, right? Exactly. I just want to make it explicit.
So when it's calling it the Paschal lamb in the Breita is not
the Paschal lamb.
What we would all think of as Paschal lamb. It's done a little like.
So this is Rav Sheshet's argument against Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said it happened. No, Rav Chisda is saying it ended up in the list because it normally lives there, but it doesn't apply. Rav Sheshet says that's not good enough. What we're saying is this thing that we're talking about
isn't what we think it is.
Is something else.
Isn't what? In other words, Rav Chisda is saying the Breita is talking about the actual Paschal lamb sacrifice,
right?
But it shouldn't be there in the list,
right?
It's
in
only
this
there,
context,
it's only there by accident because it's similar to these other offerings.
Correct.
In practical terms, if Rav Sheshet was my rabbi and I said, "Listen, I have this problem. I forgot to go to Jerusalem and sacrifice the Paschal lamb, but I meant to, so I set aside a lamb from my flock to bring down, and then I never got there. What do I do?" Rav Sheshet says, there's this Breita that says that you can go down there, but it counts for your shlemim offering, and it's not your Paschal offering?
No,
because
that's a situation where you forgot to go, you didn't go for whatever reason. What Rav Sheshet is talking about is a situation where you have lost it. It wandered off and you didn't know where it was.
So you brought another lamb.
You pick out another one, and then later on you find the first one.
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah, if you forgot to go, you're cut off from all Israel.
Wait,
But that's not the circumstance that Rav Sheshet is naming.
So the one that you find later,
right,
is
now it becomes
it's hekdesh, right, which means it's designated.
Right. But he's saying it's your shlemim offering. It's not your Pesach.
Correct.
But it kind of fits in the
And
stories.
But it's Shalmei Pesach.
Right.
In other words, it's not. It still is a shlamim for Pesach, but it's not. It's not the Pesach offering. It's not
And
Korban Pesach, but
I
it is
hate
Shalom
this.
Pesach.
This is. You can disagree whether my terminology is correct or not, but I would put this in the broader category of what's called a mute, which is where you say the circumstances under which the Talmud is talking about it are actually more limiting than you think they are. So this is the one circumstance when it's applied, which is basically like when you grew up in LA, so you know a little bit. No, your wife grew up in LA.
In any
you
case.
know LA. There's these spots in some cities, New York City, LA, are great, where there's parking signs that are 17 feet high and have 87 limiting circumstances.
Right.
It's 2-hour parking except on Sundays when there's street sweeping, but when there's holidays it doesn't apply, but also when it's Thursday of the 4th day of the month, then it does apply, and you're suddenly like, you're giving me a headache.
Right. I
just
can't
either-
park here. That's the answer.
Give me a ticket or I'll park somewhere else. Right? Those are your choices. And so that's why it gives me a headache. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like for Rav Sheshet, he's done better logic here potentially than Markiz does. But at the end of the day, he sliced out a situation where only one guy in 50 years is ever going to have this
But
problem.
wait a sec. Let's not get lost in the. No. That's not what I'm saying. Let's not get lost in the distinction between the question and the answer. The question is, we have this thing on a list, and it shouldn't be there, but it is. And so that's the problem we're solving, which is that Rav Chisda has an answer, Rav Sheshet has an answer. You might say Rav Sheshet's answer is so limiting, like I can't park there, right? Using your metaphor. But let's not conflate those two things. Which is, the question is a totally reasonable one, which is, we have this list, there's a problem on the list, how do we resolve the problem, assuming that there isn't a mistake?
It would be like if we had a source that said, in public, a woman should not hug her brother-in-law, father-in-law, nephew, and then husband is on the list. And you go, one person goes, husband is only on the list because he's the son of the father-in-law, and he's the brother of the brother-in-law, and so he's just grouped with the Machatanim, but he really shouldn't be there because of course she can hug him. And somebody else says, no, the husband that it refers to in that list is actually an ex-husband. Because sometimes we call a person that she was married to and divorced her husband, even though he's no longer her husband. Because that's really what this did here.
I like that you made an analogy that's equally as complicated.
But I'm saying, here the thing.
But I understand.
The point is that what they're saying is that Paschal Lamb referred to in the Breita isn't a Paschal Lamb.
Right.
It's what was designated to be the Paschal Lamb and now no longer is. That's what I mean by ex-husband to husband.
Right. It's a nice analogy. Yeah.
I don't think that Paschal Lamb means what you think it means.
So.
But then you get the great
Right. So let's get to that sweet.
Jeremy's point, Rav Sheshet's very quickly.
Yeah.
Jeremy's point, Rav Sheshet's answer is a more elegant solution to the question. Or
Yeah.
it addresses the question more elegantly than Rav Sheshet.
It's right. I think I would say so. That's a judgment call, right? I think so. Oh, thank you.
But it also,
Always like that answer.
You're right.
Rav Sheshet's also acknowledging that who are we to judge the prior generations of scholars, right? And that's a general approach, right? That the ones who came before, the previous generations, afforded that respect. We can't argue with them, and therefore we say this is the text we were given, right? They would not have made a mistake. Therefore, how do we explain the text?
I think that's powerful, right? Let's not assume a mistake
Right.
when we can give them the benefit.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
have to assume they were right, and then we have to figure out why they were right.
Right. But in context for ourselves.
Right.
Right. Let's make it. It has to work for us still.
It has to make sense.
Right.
It can't mean that. Right? Because if it meant that, they'd be wrong. And they can't be wrong.
But
So
you
if
have
it
to
can't
find
mean
a
that,
way
why
in
is
which
it
they
there?
are right.
Well, they accidentally left it in. I'm uncomfortable with the notion that they made an accident and put it in the list by accident. So someone else comes
also
along and
kind
says,
of
no,
a
so what they
mistake.
had to have meant is this.
Right, because the first reasoning would still say that there's a mistake in there.
Right.
somewhere.
Or there's no reason, and having no reason is not satisfying. Right. Let's finish this off because I know I want to respect everybody's time. So the Gemara asks, if so, right? We're talking about this peace offering. is the same. This is the same as the peace offerings listed earlier. It is still redundant, right? So if we go back to look at our Breita, which you don't have to do, peace offerings are in there already.
Exactly. So why do you need it?
Right.
Now it's not a mistake, but it's unnecessary. If you're telling me that Pesach offering isn't a Pesach offering, it's just a Shlamim offering, I already have Shlamim in the list.
Right.
I don't need to be told it at all.
Exactly. So the Gemara answers that very reasonable question. The Breita taught the halacha with regard to a peace offerings brought in place of a paschal lamb. So, let's just pause. The Breita is teaching the...
Wait a minute. What paragraph are we now on?
We are in the fourth paragraph on 264. I'm just going really slowly. Yeah, because we want to make sure we get this, right? So the question is, peace offerings are already on this list, so we have a redundancy. And so the Gemara answers that problem about the redundancy. The Breita taught the halacha with regard to peace offerings brought in place of a paschal lamb, and it also taught the halacha with regard to peace offerings brought independently. Right? So it seems to say it's doing both. The reason this repetition is that it might enter your mind to say, since the peace offerings are brought in place of the paschal lamb, now we're jumping onto 5b, they are considered like the paschal lamb itself. And so one transgresses the prohibition against delaying as soon as one festival has passed. The Breita therefore teaches us that this is not so, as even this type of peace offering is treated like the other offerings and there's no liability until 3 festivals have passed. Meaning to say, right, we have this list where a peace offering shows up, and the paschal lamb, which we can replace as peace offering from paschal lamb, and the naming of peace offering itself are actually 2 separate things. And you might think that you can do a peace offering instead of a paschal lamb, but you can't. They are actually also separate things. So it's like 2 separate things running in parallel, right? And as a result, even this type of peace offering fits into our category of you shall not delay.
I'd express it a little differently.
Please.
What you had designated as a Pesach offering that you now can bring as a Shlamim offering is a Shlamim offering. Nobody denies that. So since it's a Shlamim offering, it's subject to the same rules as Shlamim offerings. That we know. That we were already told. Shlamim is in the list. But if Shlamim is already in the list, and it follows the exact same rules, then why did you need to teach it? Why did we actually even need to bring it in the list? It's that because it's a special case of Shlamim, I might have thought that it was an exception to the rules of Shlamim on account of it having been originally designated to be a Pesach offering. So I might have thought that actually, in other words, if you had left this off the list, then somebody might have come along and said, it says that Shlamim you're allowed to delay. But what about a Shlamim that you brought that had been designated as a Pesach offering, but then you lost it and found it? You're not allowed to delay. So therefore, the list does say Pesach offering in order to preempt your thinking that might be an exception.
There's a big difference there.
It's called a Havamina.
Nice, well explained.
The Shalom offering is totally voluntary, correct?
What?
The Shalomim is totally a voluntary offering, but the Pesach is a mandatory offering. So you shouldn't be getting those 2 confused. They're just saying that because you blew it on the mandatory offering, you can.
But they didn't blow it. Remember, our circumstance is that you replaced it. You didn't miss it. You just have an extra lamb now.
But you might have thought that it has the residue. In other words, you might have thought that even though you're allowed b'di'eved, right? You're allowed to bring it as a shlamim after the fact, to bring it as a shlamim offering. It still has this
It still feels like
hint
Pesach.
of this
Feels like
residue
Pesach.
of having been the Paschal offering.
Yeah.
Therefore, we're stricter about delaying about it. But this comes to say, you might have thought that, but no. Once it now
moves
is,
out of the category.
Once it now is not the Pesach offering, once it's now being brought as a Shlamim offering, it's a Shlamim offering. The whole davar in every way.
It moves categories. Nice.
With no residue. There's no.
Right.
But it's still subject to the theme of don't delay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, which is because it exists in all that other list, it still fits Shoshana Tele. Exactly. Which, as you very well put it before, is our last thread that we were able to put back, at least in this detour, to make sure this fits. We are definitely stopping here today. So this is because we'll start something new next week.
I can do these last couple of paragraphs.
We are next week. So I'll come back with it. So I want to just say good learning, everyone. That was very complicated, but that was well done.